and YouTube Live.
Ready, Freddie? Yeah, all right. Well, welcome to the Planning Commission tonight. You two, and you three, and Sean. Okay, let me get my computer on here. Okay, well, we only have one thing for the night. So let's start with pledge and prayer, I guess. And I didn't ask anyone. Would anyone like to volunteer?
Pledge.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Let's start with pledge.
Yes, pledge first.
If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our eternal Father in heaven, we humbly approach Thee this evening at the Planning Commission meeting. We're grateful, Father, for this community in which we live. We're grateful for our good neighbors and friends that surround us. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to serve in our community. We ask Thy blessing upon this meeting tonight and pray that things will go well and that we can have a good discussion. And we say these things humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Rich. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent. Well, I guess just the minutes?
Yep, just a minute.
Just the minutes, not the consent agenda. I'm used to saying that in my other meetings. Okay.
I'll make a motion that we approve the Planning Commission meeting minutes from May 11th, 2023.
I have one comment. I noticed that April, or whoever printed these out, said Grant Daybell, and it's Lanny Daybell, right? Pretty sure that was Lanny that was here that night.
Okay, we'll make that correction.
Any other
Nope, second.
observations? Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so we have one action item, consideration of an ordinance adopting Mapleton City Code Section 18.84.425, governing short-term rentals within the city. Okay, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, members of the commission. So you guys recall the history of this, right? We had short-term rentals were allowed for a time in the A2 zone on 5 acres or larger. There were some issues with those that the Planning Commission, the council had, and ultimately that use was removed from the allowed use in the A2 zone. But when the council did that, they did say that they were interested in at least exploring whether some policy should be adopted, allowing them throughout the city, right? And so in October of last year, we had a public hearing where staff presented a draft ordinance. There was much discussion. A lot of public showed up at the meeting. We received a lot of correspondence. The minutes and those letters are in your packet. Planning Commission discussed it and ultimately closed the public hearing and continued it. One of the things that Planning Commission talked about was potentially having a work session with the council. We did bring that up to the council during a retreat this year, and the council was pretty split on where they were on short-term rentals as well. And so their preference was just to have the Planning Commission review it, make a recommendation, and they would take it up from there. We've held it off, bringing it back, partly because each year during the legislative session, short-term rentals seems to be a topic that comes up. Sometimes bills get in, sometimes they don't, so we wanted to make sure we waited until that was completed so that we didn't adopt something that was conflicting with legislation. But there was no legislation that would impact the city's ability. So basically we're back before you with, since we didn't really get clear direction from the commission or the council on the previous ordinance, it's basically back before you now for review. One thing, we pointed this out in the staff report, one thing just to keep in mind, the general plan's guidance is to obviously to ensure that land uses are compatible and to ensure that any commercial uses in residential zones are meant to be incidental and do not negatively impact the quiet rural atmosphere of the area. So as you discuss this, kind of keep that main guidance in mind. As far as the public feedback at the meeting and also all the correspondence we've received, Those that were against it generally were concerned that it would detract from the character of the city or character of their neighborhoods. They were concerned about enforcement and the ability to monitor. These are somewhat difficult to monitor. Concerns over crime and traffic and noise, the transient nature of tenants, and one of the issues that staff brought up was just the potential for a reduction in our moderate income housing, right? If accessory dwelling units are the city's primary way of complying with the moderate income housing requirements, if some of those decide to go to short-term rentals, it just could potentially impact our just our ability to provide that. As far as those that were generally for allowing them, most of them fell on the side of property owners' rights to use their property as they see fit, would provide additional revenue to owners. We had a few letters that were indicating that there are people who are retired and looking for ways to supplement their income and that this would allow them to do that. It would provide a service, it provides an opportunity for people to stay within the city that they don't have now, potential revenue to the city, and short-term rentals can be better than long-term rentals as far as property maintenance goes because people are there constantly preparing the property and readying it for the next stay. So those were some of the fors and against reasons that you can keep in mind as you discuss it. The way I would recommend we approach this tonight, let's first decide if the commission thinks that short-term rentals should be allowed in some form or fashion. Let's make sure there's a consensus there, because if there's not, if you think that they should not be allowed, then our discussion really doesn't need to go any further. So maybe, Cherie, start with that, and if the commission's generally in favor of at least looking into it more, we can then hit on each of the individual requirements that are adopted in the standards and decide whether that's something you'd like to recommend or not.
Okay, what are your feelings?
Do we have a definition for short-term rental? Like, let's try to wrap our arms around that real fast. Let's
Less than
quantify
30
it.
days.
Less than 30 days, okay.
I personally think that we should have something. I think that there are some really very responsible people that have them, and they've done a really good job with them, and I think there should be something, otherwise everybody's going to be under the table.
I'm generally in favor of them, and I'd rather have them above board and
Yes.
have them apply for a permit with the city. But also, I am mindful of impact to neighborhoods, and I think that there can be a reasonable parameters put around any applicant to make it beneficial for both the neighborhoods and for those who want to have a short-term rental. And we've had short-term rentals in the city in the past, correct?
Yeah, in the A2 zone. So we've approved 2 permits. One is no longer in operation, so we just have one formally legalized.
Broadbent?
Broadbents. Mm-hmm.
The Broadbents, and then the other one was
The Nemelka House, right
Nemelka's.
there by it.
yeah.
Both in my
So
neighborhood.
so the history of the short-term rentals in Mapleton, have we had police action at any of those? Have we had calls and complaints, and what is the history of those?
Yeah, we can get into that a little as we get into the enforcement issues. We have had calls on both of those. I think the differences between those and what we're proposing is when those were proposed, there wasn't limitations on occupancy, and they were both of them are such large properties that it caters more to the large groups that tend to have issues like
Okay.
disturbing the peace.
Yeah, so other than that, my thoughts are generally if it's an owner-occupied building and they're renting out a portion of their house while they occupy the home, that doesn't give me any heartburn, because they will make sure that number one, the parking's in place and that their house is not going to get trashed, and so the people are there, their short-term rental in their basement while they're there. That gives me very little heartburn, and I think that is something that we should consider.
So I'll go through each one of the items, and we can kind of discuss things like that in detail. I think initially just, is this the discussion we want to have?
Yeah.
Jesse
Sounds like we
and
probably
Jake.
do. But
I'm for short-term rentals, and when the council kicked it back to us, I did a lot of research so I can
Okay.
Oh, nice.
present some
I've
of
done
that
a
if
lot
you
of
want.
research too. I read a bunch on different municipalities and how and the problems that they've had with short-term rentals and their solutions for those problems. So I've read up quite a bit.
Good. Jesse?
I like ADUs, and I'd really like to push ADUs, and I think the legislature would like to push ADUs.
Yeah.
Well, ADUs are here, so that,
Yeah, and I think it disincentivizes people to focus on ADUs if you have STRs. So I know it feels a little heavy-handed, I just don't think it's worth it. I think it's hard. The question I ask is, who are we catering towards? Because if you do short-term rentals, then you're getting the weekend people who are just here kind of transient, and so there's that transient nature. I would love to cater to the person who's like, hey, I'm a traveling nurse and I'm in a spot for 1 to 2 months, or I'm a traveling professor or something. So if you put like a 30-day window on it, or a 30-day minimum, but then it's not a short-term rental, it's just a long-term rental. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, what your feedback is, because
So my family, my daughter just graduated with her master's degree, and so we went up to Logan for the graduation, and we rented an entire house. And it gave us the opportunity, rather than renting 6 motel rooms, which were not available,
Yeah, I
to
see
have
that.
all of our family there and have a gathering place. And it was
Yeah, I see that.
fantastic for our family.
That's the huge benefit that I see, because we've used it for my family, my wife's side of the family, and my side of the family, 9 to 10 different times. And to get 6 hotel rooms for the family to stay at, and then you're limited to a 500, 700 square foot hotel room for kids and families to
And no
try to
gathering
gather. No
place.
gathering place, no outdoors to throw a ball, kick a soccer ball, no
Yeah.
TVs, no game
Sundance
rooms.
has short-term rentals. Other resort communities have short-term rentals, and they're beneficial for that very reason, is that we bring people in who are vacationers or whatever, and it gives them the opportunity for gathering place. They bring their,
But it's not just vacationers. I mean, we used it when my grandparents died down in Dewey, Arizona. Dewey, Arizona is not a vacation hotspot.
Right.
But, you know, when you have 4 families traveling down for a funeral, what better way to gather and celebrate the life of a family member to rent a whole house?
and it's
celebrate,
cheaper
and
than
it's cheaper.
renting 6 motel rooms. you know.
So it sounds like, why don't we go through, I'll hit on the restriction, maybe we'll go through each one, hit on what we currently have proposed, and then you could decide whether you think this is a restriction that you want to include, modify, or adjust.
I think it's also important that, you know, reading through TJ's comments, I thought all of his comments were valid. But his overall feeling was that it hadn't generally changed the dynamic of the neighborhood.
There was no impact, and he didn't have any complaints
But
on the short term.
he was generally against it, and I agree with that. And I know the reasons why.
Okay.
should have invited Karen Thuisen.
Perfect.
So the first requirement that we have, and again, when we drafted this, we did look at other cities, but we also wanted to consider the general plan guidance of keeping this incidental and low impact. And so short-term rentals, as we've drafted it, must be owner occupied. Now, what that means is the property has to be owned by the person who resides in the main home. It does not require, how we've currently drafted it, to have the owner on site when it's rented. Now, if they have a basement apartment, that's one thing. That this would allow the flexibility if somebody was going away for the summer for a couple of months and wanted to rent, or a couple of weeks on vacation and wanted to rent it, they could do that and not be on the property. But the main reason for the requirement is to ensure that this doesn't become like investment properties. People can't buy a house just to rent it as short-term rentals. Okay. We okay with that?
yeah,
Requirement?
My only argument with that is there are properties and there are opportunities where, here in Mapleton, for instance, where the Melkas probably use it as a short-term rental because it was a family home. It's a family property. They wanted to keep it with the family, but nobody in the family could afford it.
Yeah.
The property taxes, the upkeep and everything else. And so a family to keep that family property, what better way for it to be rented out when the family's not using it in a short-term rental atmosphere where they are doing the upkeep, they are hosting families, they are allowing other people to enjoy that property and do the upkeep and the maintenance of it. So to have an owner occupied, would you have rented the house that you were in at Logan if the owner was occupying the home?
Well, again, so this isn't requiring the owner to live in the home, it's just, or to be there when you're there, it's just,
They own it.
but
They-
your point is that
But the-
when they aren't there, they cater it more to visitors, right?
But there are some other things that you could put on to help avoid the investment absentee owners. And some of the research I've done in some of these other counties is they require you to sign an affidavit and register it with the Secretary of State that you release that, the property taxes. So as if it's your primary residence, you have the ability to get a discount on your property taxes. You sign that affidavit and you release that with the Secretary of State. Now you're paying a higher tax rate. And so, yes, is it a commercial? Yes, but is it going to help reduce some of these people who are buying these homes for short-term rentals?
So you're saying you would want to make sure that they were getting the
I don't want them,
primary resident
I
exemption?
don't want them to get the
You
primary
don't.
resident option because it'll help limit the investors buying homes strictly for short-term rentals. Because then they don't get that discount, the 55% tax credit or whatever the cities are. I think Utah County is 35 or 55% tax credit.
I
And it
think
helps
it's-
limit the investors, but it also allows the people who have an estate in here in Mapleton or other areas to keep it within the family and subsidize that and help pay for those property taxes.
So currently, don't we have the stipulation that they have to have somebody who's on call 24 hours a day?
And that's
Yeah,
the other restriction.
doesn't mean they have to live there, but you just have to have somebody available to
Available.
respond.
Washington County, Anaheim, California, Lake Tahoe, you have to be available 365, 7 days a week. In Anaheim, you have to answer your phone and respond within 45 minutes, or you get a certain dings on, and they could actually revoke the short-term rental property. So there's things like that you can put on it as well.
Okay,
Sean, let's say we put a bunch of restrictions on it. What's the enforcement look like? Is that all from a city standpoint, or is that we just create a citizen hotline
There already is a citizen hotline.
and that goes to the city? Okay.
So I don't know if you've seen that on the city's website. You can report potholes, road conditions, zoning issues, neighbor trash issues, nuisances. So you could add another thing inside that website to report short-term rental violations. I know it's another thing for the city to have to enforce,
Yeah.
but maybe you require it to be a yearly application, conditional use, that, hey, we can revoke your short-term rental at any time if you break so many short-term rental policies.
Or
You
if
re-
there's, if
Yeah,
there's a
we'll
certain-
hit the, on this, we'll hit the enforcement topic that we can discuss. So
Okay.
probably on the owner occupied, just come to a,
so I guess it sounds like, what do you think, Jesse? I don't know, I'm mixed. I feel like I like the idea of someone being there because then you know it's going to be kept under control and you're not going to have crazy parties and nuisances. I don't,
So what is it, so under the terms, owner occupied, it does not require the owner to be on site when rented. That's, what does that mean?
Does the owner have to
How much
leave?
do they have to be on site in order to be considered?
yeah, so what, the whole purpose of this requirement is that it's not an investment property that's purchased or used strictly for short-term rentals. The idea is that
They live
if
there a
it is
portion
a
of the-
primary
this is where
residence.
you live. And again, the reason with the, because of the general plan guidance is to make sure this is incidental, that the property is not just a short-term rental. The property's primary use is as a primary dwelling, and then short-term rentals would be allowed as an incidental use.
Ancillary.
That was the
Okay.
basis for
Yeah,
it.
and I like that. I like that. I think that would limit it to not just 24/7 people
So-
coming and going.
So if an owner lives in the house for November, December, January, and is not there for the rest of the year, but it is one of their primary residences,
Look, you can only have one primary.
Yeah, the county, we would verify with the county records that that's their
so how do you
primary
figure that
So
out?
really, I mean, I don't think there's a rule that says you have to live in the home, be in the
Well,
home so
I know
many
people in
days.
Mapleton who have 5 houses. They own 5 houses.
Yeah, well, they
And-
technically can't claim them all as
But
primaries.
there's one that's claimed as your primary.
And the
Right.
rest of them would be second homes or investment properties.
But the next one is what would restrict what you're talking about is,
Okay.
right? And we can get into that one next, I think, once the first one, you decide on how you.
How many of us have used a short-term rental? Cherie, have you?
I have.
I actually haven't.
I have.
I don't,
mean,
well, no, I take that back. I did. I went to Washington just recently. We stayed in one, and it was lovely. The owner actually lived next door, and he rented out the house next door to him, but
Would you consider renting that same house if the owner lived in the basement or lived above, and you rented the basement? It's kind of
I
an
think,
awkward situation.
yeah, I think you're right. I think it's not the same. You don't feel like you have full use of the property, and you would have oversight, and maybe you don't have privacy.
The people that were against it, and even TJ, they were worried about the massive parties and one-person orgy parties and all this crazy stuff. And my experience, my family of 18 is not
Was
having any
that
time
on
of those.
purpose, Jesse?
It was on there, and so
That
That's part
was
of the permanent public record.
spot on.
April's gonna put that Jake Doug said that on the
Nice.
So this, this requirement doesn't require the owner to be there.
Yeah, I
Right,
like,
so-
I
But
like
to live
this.
there
Yeah,
24/7 when it's not being rented out, no more than 90 days, the second requirement that we're
Yeah.
probably gonna touch on next.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I think that the situation, and I have rented multiple short-term rentals, but I think the person that benefits more is the person traveling and visiting more than it does the neighbor. So when I show up to Grandpa's funeral in Phoenix and we roll into a house 50 deep with 20 cars, yes, it's great for us, but I'm sure the neighborhood was like, oh my gosh, we got freaking 20 cars on the street.
That's the other restriction is you have
Well,
to
we'll
provide.
get to
per
parking
on-
later,
Yeah.
but yeah, I get it.
And I'm also just cognizant of like, we're gonna set a bar, if we put a bunch of restrictions, I also don't wanna create unrealistic restrictions to enforce. Or where we create animosity where it's like the neighbors are constantly peeking over, just looking for some reason to call in, and it creates animosity, and the spirit of harmony within the neighborhood is suddenly like starts to erode. And so I struggle with that one, and overall, I don't think it's worth it. But I'm glad we're just the recommending body.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all valid points.
Quick question. Have you had people, a high volume of people asking for permits for short-term rentals?
We get calls all the time on what's the city's policy. I think most of those are more of the investor types
Oh.
looking.
Yeah.
But we do get them, property owners do it all the time. They'll be putting in a basement apartment and we'll ask, can I do this as a short-term rental?
I think this really, what we're doing here today, we really have to be thoughtful about, because I, like you, don't want investors coming in per
Yeah.
se and taking over the city and buying up all the houses and just filling them with transients.
Yeah, I
transient.
wouldn't want that in my
But-
cul-de-sac.
But I think that I'm in favor of the short-term rentals, provided that we put the proper restrictions on them, so.
So number one, owner occupied or not?
I'm a nay.
I think a nay on owner occupied, but it must be a primary residence.
You can't have that,
That's-
though.
Is that the same thing?
The same thing.
One and the same. Okay, so
I'm
yes.
a nay on that.
I'm just a nay on everything.
I think it should
You'd
be.
be for that, though, Jesse, though.
Before that,
Oh.
then if you,
Okay, then yay.
so we're split.
Yeah,
So this will just come down to somebody making a motion and we'll go from there. But
Do we need to
I just
motion
thought
on
it'd be
each
helpful.
thing?
No, you
Okay.
can wait till the end.
so.
Of course, we only have 4 people here tonight.
I know, where's everybody?
Okay, so
Well-
the second one, 90-day max number. Again, this was meant to keep it incidental and to not make it a primary use. This was a secondary use that would allow you up to 25% of the year. Many of the comments that we got back that were for, obviously, were concerned about that limitation. So
The people who were in
the people who
favor.
want to have short-term rentals,
So
yeah.
if
we're
you wanted to rent it out every weekend, you'd be over 100 days a year.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know, let's talk about it.
I think if it's owner occupied and and the people are there periodically at least, then they could rent it however many days, as long as it's being taken care of and there's oversight, and
That's,
I don't see a problem with going more than 90 days,
I agree.
as long as it's a responsible use and it's not bothering the neighbors.
We don't need a comment from Jesse. Let's go to,
Just go up Hobble Creek or
Yeah.
go to Provo or Springville or Spanish. There's other places nearby. We live real close.
The 90 days doesn't bother me because like Rich said, if you rented it every weekend throughout the year, it's 52 weekend. I mean, I think having a limit on the 90 days isn't horrible. I think it helps.
Yeah.
Give some
Well,
restrictions.
so give us yes or no.
Yeah, I'm good with the 90 days.
You would like it to be a max of 90 days,
Yeah, I think it's a good compromise to approving number one.
Oh,
than
goodness.
number two.
okay?
yeah, it's true. I mean, if,
So
if you did not
are
have
fine
an
with
owner,
Max.
if you did not have an owner-occupied residence, it's highly unlikely someone would purchase the property if they could only rent it for 90 days. I think that's part of what you're saying is
Okay.
right.
Oh,
That's,
yeah, I like that.
okay.
Okay,
I can see that.
Okay, the next one was occupancy. You know, occupancy tends, the higher the occupancy tends to create the issues. Doesn't mean it always does. Certainly all of us have been probably a part of where they haven't. So what we had proposed was 2 per bedroom, but a max of 12. Again, those that were for it were concerned that that was too restrictive.
Well,
Again,
it's
this is a
gonna
starting
depend,
point to
like,
discuss.
If you've got a passel of grandkids and there's a bunk room, and, you know, you're gonna put all the kids in one room.
Yeah, so the intent of this isn't to mean that you can only have 2 people in each bedroom. It's just the number of bedrooms times 2 determines how many you get total in the house.
So, but the max 12 would go away then if you do it that way.
Well,
2 per bedroom?
No, the 2 per bedroom with a max of 12.
If you have, I mean,
So
some
if
of
you
these
have
homes are
more than
like-
5
they're
bedrooms.
Eight-bedroom homes, so technically you could have 16, so the
Yep.
max 12 doesn't really apply there.
Yeah, the intent was to say 2 per bedroom, but then you couldn't go above that. But again, that's what we're here for you guys to provide your
Yeah,
guidance
I
on.
Do
don't-
adults?
I would say
Just 2
that we
total.
change
well, there
that.
was something else in there about however many adults per however many kids.
I think it's the definition if you're less than 2,
Oh.
you don't count it.
I thought I saw something else.
I'll
I
look
would
at it,
change
but
that
anyway.
to off-street parking. So maximum number of vehicles that fit on the estate. We could change the occupancy, but I don't think that 12 is enough for some of these houses. If you're traveling with an entire family, you're gonna have grandma and grandpa and grandkids and
I think if you did
multiple
2 per
siblings.
bedroom, that would limit it, because there are some lofts that have bunk beds lined the whole loft.
Yep.
And you could put 20 people in there, but then
Yep.
there's 4 other bedrooms. But if that loft is considered a bedroom, then there's only 2 in the loft, and so that takes into account that.
Yeah.
But the parking, I think you just say no on-street parking, so it doesn't affect the neighbors. It doesn't affect city plows during the wintertime.
So you would-
They have to park either in the driveway or in the garage
There has to be
provided.
parking on the property.
So you
So you would just
wouldn't even
remove
want
the
them to park in
12.
front of the house,
No, because I think that would be detracting from
the neighbors?
the neighborhood and then adding, I mean, because Jesse can roll up with 50 people, Teslas and big Cadillac SUVs that are all going to line the street.
So the idea then would be keep it at 2 per bedroom to determine total, but not have a max.
I think that's reasonable.
I wonder if you say however many people per
Or-
whatever square footage there is in the home or
I mean,
something.
Sean, as this goes to, it's going to have to go through an application process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of the other cities require the application process and then the building official to go through the house. And then the building official determines the max occupancy.
Yeah, the challenge with occupancy is it's, it's based on square footage.
Right. So-
And you can get, like, I think the Nemelka's house, for example, the occupancy was like 72 or something. I mean, it was a huge number, much more, and it's hard to imagine, no matter what the family is, having 72 people in a house that wouldn't create some concerns for some neighbors, right? That's where we were trying, again, the whole idea and the concept was to incidental, low impact.
I mean, I think there should be 12 allowed, more than 12 allowed.
So 2 per bedroom, no max?
maybe. But then, like you say, there's some bedrooms that could house 10 kids.
Yeah.
But it's still considered a
But that's
bedroom.
still, that keeps all the cars, because you're gonna have minivans if there's that many kids. You're gonna have minivans and they can park in the garage and they can park off the street.
If you
And as
did
long-
two per bedroom and you submitted a floor plan, and then they can count the bedrooms and say, yes, 2 per bedroom, and then they can create a max occupancy based off of the bedrooms on the floor plan, and then all on,
Or
And they may-
someone said,
and you-
look at the number of beds.
Which one? Yeah, I think that would be,
Comment.
that would be difficult to, obviously, beds could be changed out and
Yeah.
handled pretty quickly. But
Get that
if
all
you
the time.
did, if you did the 2 per bedroom, didn't have the max, we then have a parking requirement, which would keep it from getting too,
Out of
that could
hand-
potentially
out
keep
of
it out
hand.
of control. So that's a possibility.
Is it-
So
Okay.
that's the next one, one parking space per 4 occupants. So you'd have to be able to demonstrate that you could meet that on site. You know, so your bigger properties could handle a number of cars, but smaller ones couldn't. And,
Yeah, I like that.
the minimum night stay, we had some people request that they be allowed, you know, single nights. Again, that's, those are up for your discussion.
I think the single nights, like it says, it limits the one-night party rentals. So if you had even a
2-night
three, a
minimum.
3-night rental.
Mm.
I mean,
I like the two-night stay.
Okay, and then the enforcement, what we have in the code is basically, we just follow our adopted standards for disturbing the peace, enforcement of noncompliance of any of the requirements is a Class C misdemeanor, which is a fine of up to $1,000 and up to 90 days in prison. So there are some heavy fines, and what we've indicated, proposed that if you get 2 citations during a year, your permit would be revoked.
I like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, those are the basic standards, so I think you're probably, kind of what I heard,
Can I revisit the 90-day thing?
yeah,
I wonder if we could just make that a little,
Oop,
if you
sorry.
did every weekend, how many days is that?
52 weeks a year.
104 days.
So maybe we say 120, so that those people who, I don't know, sometimes you're renting it for a week, sometimes you're renting it for a weekend. I don't know, I think if you're going to allow it, you might as
This
well allow a reasonable
which
amount
way
of
you going?
days that's logical. Is 90 logical and
Or-
not too restrictive?
Yep.
And I mean, obviously, I don't know how you regulate that, but it's going to be neighbors. I don't know.
What?
For me, it seems like more like 120 seems reasonable if we're going to do all this stuff.
Do you see much verbiage within CCNRs of existing neighborhoods around short-term rentals, or is this such a new thing that hasn't historically been adopted?
Most of them don't, but there are some that have addressed it.
Short-term rentals have been around different municipalities since the late 80s, early 90s. So they've been around for a while.
Is
Yeah,
there,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, Sean, is there anywhere where they've made, well, I know Hurricane or those areas, they have specific neighborhoods. Is there something like a percentage of the homes in the city
Yeah.
we could make a max, or certain areas? I don't think that's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, obviously, there's a limited, there's more demand than I think most people assume, because there's people coming for BYU graduation and family reunions and family events. So there is demand, but to me, I have a hard time assuming that there's going to suddenly be
This total.
dozens and dozens or
influx.
hundreds of these in Mapleton, right? That have all of them that are renting at that amount. That seems unlikely. Where usually where we've talked to cities that are more like us, Springville, Highland, North Salt Lake, we talked to a bunch that have them, like somebody at the last meeting was bringing up North Salt Lake's ordinance and some of the things that they've done that they were familiar with. So we talked pretty extensively with them. They have 7 permits.
Oh, wow.
For all of North Salt
Yeah,
Lake.
Oh,
and it
wow.
was, you know, for them, the enforcement isn't once the permit is issued, the enforcement is those that don't have a permit.
Right.
But it was, you know, so the cities that are more similar to Mapleton, you know, we're not gonna see a situation that we're gonna be like St. George or Park City, right?
Yeah.
We're just not a tourist destination.
There's 2 right now that were permitted, but if you were to go to Airbnb and VRBO,
Yeah.
there's probably a dozen
Yeah,
on there
there's
right now.
probably that many that
So what do we do with that?
they'll
kinda
have to
like-
come into,
It's
They'll
kinda
have
like
to
when
come get a
somebody
permit.
finishes their basement in Mapleton and they don't pull a permit.
yeah.
I, as a builder, have to pull a permit, and I will pull a permit all the time, but there are dozens of basements that
Oh,
don't
more
get
than that,
permits.
yeah.
Yeah. Most people don't pull a permit to finish their basement.
So what I think generally then that I've heard the consensus on would be the first requirement that we would strike, that it has to be the primary residence of a have to be owner occupied.
What's the thought on adding that affidavit so that it's registered with the Utah County that they have to pay?
Yeah, I'd need to do a little research on that, but yeah, this'll be whoever makes the motion. Yeah, absolutely, we could do that. The next item was,
You're mean.
I think deciding on 90 days, whether that is the limit or whether you'd want to consider more. And then the other change would be we would eliminate the maximum of 12 and just keep it at the 2 per bedroom. Those were seemed to be the,
The other things that you didn't talk about, Sean, I don't know if, I mean, obviously if you have a permit application, there's a fee that you could charge, $1,500, $1,800. And then, on these websites, Airbnb, VRBOs, a lot of them have a room tax. So you can start charging a room tax, 120 days a year or 90 days a year.
the city could collect up to 1% on each one.
So it's not a huge revenue
there's a
stream, but
there's a
eventually we're
standard
gonna
for that?
stop farming houses and we're not gonna have those impact fees to
Yeah.
pay for.
So if they go through Airbnb, does the city,
City gets a
the
check.
city gets that?
All of them have to do it. Airbnb just automatically does it for you.
They collect it and pay you. So it doesn't go to Airbnb?
Well, they send it to the state.
Oh, they
The
get their
state-
own cut.
Oh,
The
I
state
know,
remits it
okay,
from there, but
okay, so there's
Hold
both
on.
of those.
How was that? Was it problematic as an owner?
No.
No.
But my neighbors probably hated it.
You think they did?
I owned a condo in Provo that I did short-term rentals on.
yeah.
It was good.
Provo's
You don't have it anymore?
No, I sold it.
generally transient anyway, but.
Yeah, but I would get the traveling nurses or the traveling faculty, and they would rent for 30 days at a time, most of them, and that was great. But sometimes I would get I'm here for the football game over the weekend, and those were a little bit cumbersome, and so I'd get calls from neighbors, and it got to the point where I just valued the relationship with the neighborhoods and the people, and so I was like, this isn't worth it to me, and I'm sorry, and so
Did
we
you get
just,
complaints
yeah.
from your neighbors?
So then I just found that I was stuck in the middle of trying to be an accommodating host while also a respectable neighbor, and it just got to the point where the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze, in my opinion. So we decided to sell it.
Do you think it, what's the word? Reduces the affordable housing, like some people had worries?
Yeah, I mean,
It's more expensive than affordable housing. You're gonna pay a premium for a
Well,
short
sure.
term.
Right.
But,
Yeah,
but it's not a long-term, the affordable housing obviously is a permanent
yeah,
residence for
it's hard to,
somebody.
it's hard to tell how big of an impact it would make. I'm sure there are people who would prefer to do this because you could do it at your,
When you want,
you can do it when you want, use your basement
like
when you
Dan
want.
and Janet are the perfect, they probably don't want a full-time resident in
Yeah.
their basement.
How long has North Salt Lake had their ordinance in effect?
Several years,
And they've had 7, so.
yeah.
Here's the thing that I think. So I think we keep the 90 days, that we manage off-street, on-street parking, no on-street parking, and then 2 complaints and their permits pulled. I think that takes care.
Misdemeanors.
It's 2 citations.
Two
Yeah.
citations through
Citations.
Mapleton Police Department?
Yeah, we'd have to cite them.
Yeah.
So 2 citations, permits pulled. I think that takes care of all of the potential problems, not all of them, because like what Jesse was saying, you still have, if there's a general atmosphere from the neighbors, but the neighbors can report. So,
Is it 2 citations within a calendar year or just at all?
It says a calendar year, we probably should make that any 12-month period.
any 12-month period.
Yeah.
I like that.
Okay.
And so we're saying it does not need to be in a primary residence or owner occupant.
That's our recommendation.
That's the gist.
Well, that's one of the recommendations we have to vote on, obviously.
Okay, if somebody wants to try to,
Is Jake,
Formulate
Jake's gonna
that.
do it?
Jesse?
Do
why
we,
don't you make one?
do we suggest,
Let me call TJ.
yeah, there you, yeah, where's TJ when you need him?
He wrote the email.
He did. We know what his stance would be.
I know.
He was very good. His email was very good.
He is good.
Are we the one to recommend a price for the permit?
No, we'll set
Okay.
that.
Is there anything else in your research?
Not
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
I mean, we can add to what Sean's already got if we want to make
What-
it more restrictive, but
There's nothing that you think is really super imperative?
What's a good bedroom community? Like, I feel like North Salt Lake, you're still close enough to Salt Lake that you're gonna get tourists. What are the other ones that you've kind of seen as a case study for a comparison?
I think Highland's a good one.
Anaheim, California.
Yeah,
Springville's not far off, you know,
yeah.
Springville
they,
just nixed them all together, right?
no, they allow them, a lot of these requirements they have.
Well, they do allow it.
They have an owner has to be present, except for they give a 90-day per year exception to that,
Okay.
so. But they have some of the same.
What did Highland do?
Highlands has. I've got the copy of the ordinance, I didn't print it out, but theirs is fairly restrictive as well.
Is it?
Mhm.
Can we say 90 to 120 days and punt to city council like they punted to us?
Nice,
Yeah,
right?
let's do that.
And let them,
Let them
Yeah.
decide.
voted officials,
Yeah, let's
set the
decide.
standard?
Let them chew on it. Alpine banned it, didn't they?
Yeah, most cities
They did not.
kind of,
yeah, I was
most
talking to a
cities
friend
that
of mine up
aren't
there.
destinations
not
just
want it.
kind of don't have a policy, and they kind of how the ones like you see on ours, that if they exist and people don't complain, the cities don't take any action on them. But more and more cities now are realizing we need to either make it clear that yes or clear that no. That's what we're trying to do.
But if you create a policy one way or the other, then you have to enforce that policy.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you don't have a policy, then it's just,
You can run
Willy-nilly.
wild, yeah.
but they can't get a permit because there's no permit to apply for.
Right,
Double-edged sword.
it is. Yeah, it is.
You go to the next slide, Sean?
Yeah.
I'll start the motion.
Hold on, Jake, one sec.
Oh.
I thought I would just ask the three that are here. Is that okay?
Yeah, you're the chair.
Do you have any comments you want to make before we do this motion? Since the three of you took the time to come, I feel like there's
Yeah,
not very many of you.
Great point.
You can take a minute. State your name first.
So my name is Debbie Skinner, and I frequent Springville and Mapleton area quite a bit. My family's been coming up here a little over 30 years, and as time, our families have grown. And so when we do take our family vacations, we do look at your short-term rentals, your Airbnbs and stuff like that, because it is more affordable. We're able to house our families, be able to do our own shopping, not eat out, really reduce the cost of our travels. On the other flip side of that, I own a business in northern Nevada, and I have an RV park, and we are in tourism, and so we deal with a lot of, like you're talking about, the nurses that are 13 to 16 weeks. Short-term rentals are huge. It is a great revenue for the city, for the room tax or luxury transient tax, whatever. It'll help benefit and give you a cash flow. Mapleton doesn't have an access off of the highway. You don't have a lot of commercial businesses. You don't have a lot of tax base, a C tax or much like that. And so I think that you really need to look at all aspects of this. I think that it's huge beneficial to the families, to the community. And you're not talking about someone coming in. If you put the restrictions, like you are talking about, I'm kind of for the 120 days. When my family comes, we normally stay a week at a time. We come a little over 8 hours, and it's very daunting to drive that far and then turn around and go back. And we want to be able to see the sights, and we contribute to the economy other ways than that. And I think that the 2 per bedroom is a little bit tight. I don't think that it allots for any small ground children, anybody under 5. A lot of the bedrooms can, I took the kids and we all went, nieces and nephews, and we all went down to Disneyland. Of course, it's definitely more affordable to do an Airbnb versus, or a short-term rental versus lodging and staying at Disneyland. Once again, one of the bedrooms had 3 bunk beds. We were able to put 6 kids, 8 if they were little, in there. So I think that you need to look at it case by case. And I like the square footage thing, but I also like the fact that you're open to the idea to see. And I do think that it could potentially be a revenue source for the city of Mapleton. So, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Heather Naylor. I was here last time, and I also wrote a letter. But the things that you guys are talking about, I think they're great. The only one that really bothers me is the 90 days per year. So I've been doing this for 2 years. Last year I had 232 days rented. You won't find a single police call. You won't find a single complaint from my neighbors. I haven't even had to police my own people, but I live there. So I also think that it would be beneficial for those of us who do live on the property, because I think it brings a different type of guest. When they know that you're there, I've never had any issues. But as I mentioned last time too, the Airbnb allows me to continue to live in Mapleton. Pays for my property tax, pays for my my homeowner's insurance. Like, without that, I can't live here anymore on a single income. So it's huge for me. And 90 days would severely limit my income. Also considering, I know you guys don't police the Airbnb site, but I do, because I want to see what my competition is. So on average, people rent for about $100 a night, which, you know what I mean? If you're looking at $100, or 100 days, the reason why I think a lot of people are doing this is for the additional income and additional revenue for those purposes. So the bedroom thing, I'm okay with it, but then again, I'm not. Like, I have one room that's big enough for 2 queen beds. Like, I'm not stacking kids from floor to ceiling, so but that would limit me to 6 max instead of 8 right now. Let's see. Yeah, but other than that, I think those are good ideas. I think that even if we did primary residence, that would keep out the investors, because that, like you had said, then they would have to sign that, I don't think they have to live there, but I think it's important, the owner-occupied thing. I think that also helps. But thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for coming again.
My name is Christopher Ricks. I missed a lot of it, so I don't know if I missed some of the things that are most important, but I kind of agree. I like the way you guys have been thinking about it. I think the owner-occupied thing is huge. I think avoiding kind of these little mini hotels that pop up sometimes is one of the huge incentives for this type of restriction. And if it's truly owner-occupied, that's going to prevent a lot of that. And I think it makes sense for people, like, not having to be on site when it's rented. Makes sense because people you know, live in it and they travel and they are going places, and it, you know, makes it so their house is taken care of more or less, and usually those people have like a property manager. The 90 days thing, yeah, I mean, it's tricky because if it's for a second income, you know, like the previous person said, it's going to be hard to make it financially feasible. Maybe as a community that's okay, because we don't want it to be a bunch of little pop-up businesses in residential areas. But I think keeping it incidental, I don't know, that's a tricky one. But and then I think the occupancy, I think if it's small groups, and it makes a lot of sense to keep it small. So I don't know, I don't have super strong opinions. I just kind of popped in to kind of hear what was being said. I like the way you guys are discussing it, though. I think you're on the right track.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so it seems like these are the 3 hot topics. So, does anyone want to address anything further?
Process of doing that.
Jake, you want to?
I'd say we open it up to 90 days plus.
Yeah.
Maybe not restricted to the 90 days after hearing the public comment.
Yeah, I just feel like the responsible people,
Let the city council address
the
that.
number of days doesn't matter, but I don't know how you monitor responsible versus irresponsible.
Across the street counting how many times it's been rented, or I
Yeah.
don't know if Airbnb and
Yeah.
VRBOs can provide a report. There's no way to monitor it, so if you put it on there, it's gonna limit those investors, it's gonna limit those people who are strictly buying it.
For
So if you
300 days a year.
120 to 150 for non-owner occupied, and do a separate one for owner occupied up
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
more,
right,
because that would benefit
right.
the lady in the lady in the back, and then others who have also expressed.
Mm-hmm.
There's one in
Dan and Janet.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They rent their basement out
Mm-hmm.
to help pay for property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Those, yeah, they are the most responsible people in the world.
I think,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna limit 120 days up to 180 days for
Non-owner or
owner
living there.
Resident.
What's the,
non-primary resident, owner occupied, 120 to 180, and let the council decide, and then 180 to, I don't know, 365, and let the council decide for owner occupied.
Yeah.
and then the number of kids? Because I mean, I have a condo in St. George. I have 3 queen beds, but I have people come with me and my family, and I put people on the couches and throw kids in sleeping bags, and
So you would break your own rules.
so, yeah, so I don't know that I agree with 2 per bedroom on something like that. I think
That's why, look
there
at
needs to be
the research that
a
I did.
reasonable,
2 adults per bedroom, maybe.
yeah, oh, yeah, there you go.
But the research that I did, a lot of them are going to provide us a site plan and a floor plan of the home, and let someone like Sean, the planner,
Say,
look at it and
okay,
say,
this is what a reasonable number would be.
max, if it's a 10-bedroom
So
home,
that-
10 adults and 6 kids on top of that, or, I mean, let the city decide that.
I don't know,
Based
then
off
that
of-
leaves a gray area for you guys and makes you have to,
Yeah, I'd prefer not.
yeah,
I'd prefer to have a standard that you could just apply,
Yeah.
because again, the parking is going to be another limiting factor to it.
But
But,
somebody could come, and if it's a long driveway with an RV parking, they can come with a Bluebird yellow bus and
Yeah.
pack it with 30-some people.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
And they're meeting the standard by not parking on the street.
right,
So I think you have to put some sort of a square footage standard, bedroom standard, with an exception for kids, for those lofts. So you can pack the grandkids up in a loft.
mm-hmm,
I think that, I don't think that there will be a huge demand. I don't think our city is going to be overrun with short-term rentals. And I think that if there were to be that big of a demand, that the 2 citations a year would take care of the problem. If our homes were being overrun and there were being parties and et cetera, that was disrupting the nature of the neighborhood, I think those 2 citations per year would take care of the problem.
And when I personally rented through Airbnb, you have to put in the request, the number of beds and number of occupants raises a flag to that owner, and they can say yes or no. So you have 18 people, you're coming to Disneyland? No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You have
heavens.
18 people, you're coming for a funeral.
Yeah.
But most people say it's just my spouse and I, and then they show up and it's
With
like,
a van.
it's like a clown car. They just keep coming. Yeah, I saw that because as a host, I would get people who say, oh, I'm just expecting 2 people. And I would usually not meet them just because I don't, but sometimes I would be on site and be like, oh, hi, yes, child 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
But
So
don't you,
I-
as the owner, have the right to cancel
Yeah.
that reservation that night and remove them
Yeah.
from the home?
That's
Yeah.
very uncomfortable, but
Yeah, and you totally can. So this one stinks, but I'm cognizant of creating standards that are hard to enforce. So. And these are a lot, if we're gonna do this right and try to like paint it into a corner, I feel like you gotta put some standards on it.
I agree.
But then it's only as good as your enforcement of those
Right,
standards.
right.
So we'll let council figure it out. They
Yeah.
push this back
Okay,
at us
Jake,
and we'll push it back to
Let's
them.
go again.
Go again, like make my motion or go to the next item?
Make your motion.
So I make a motion that we recommend approval to the city council for the short-term rentals with the following recommendations. Short-term rental properties can be owner-occupied and non-owner occupied. The owner-occupied rentals could be rented up to 180 to 365 days a year based on a vote by council or based on council. And unowner occupied, 120 to 180 days. And the max occupancy is 2 adults per bedroom with a exception for children in a loft-type setting. How you enforce that, Sean, I don't know.
With no max.
With no max. And what's
What
the next?
about the days?
So just 2 adults per room.
we talked about that.
No limit on children
2 adults per day, and traffic,
under
all,
18.
Yeah, under 18.
all cars have to be parked in the driveway or garage, and no on-street parking. And then the
Maybe
next
go to the
slide
next
is
slide, Sean.
on-site parking, okay. Minimum 2 night stay, I'm good with. And then the enforcement. And the motion continues with the minimum of 2 night stay and the enforcement, adopted standards for Class C misdemeanor, 2 citations a year, their permit would be revoked
Per.
per
not
calendar year.
Or trailing 12-month.
Per 12
Yeah.
month period.
Not that I
Yeah.
endorse that, but just to clarify.
Jesse
Yes,
endorsed.
thank you. Thanks, Chelsea. Is there another
quick-
slide?
Quick question on the citation. Is there typically a fee with a citation, or is it just, okay?
So it's an administrative citation that goes to a judge. The judge determines what the fee and the penalty
Are there
is.
shackles and handcuffs involved?
I thought there was something about $1,000.
So
That's-
Sean,
It's up to, so the judge can decide up to 1,000 and up to 90, or up
Oh.
to 90 days.
so if they get misdemeanor and Mapleton Police Department shows up and writes a citation, but it goes to the judge and the judge does not give them a misdemeanor, that doesn't count as a citation?
Correct.
So it has to be, okay.
And Rich can do citizen's arrest.
I will do that.
You and TJ and Jesse.
So that's my motion.
I second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay,
Okay, good work.
thank you, Jesse.
Much.
Thank
My
you,
first nay
gentlemen.
in 5 years.
Wow,
We'll
I'm
let
proud of
know
you.
on When it goes to council, make sure you're aware. Thank you.
I'm proud of you. I like when someone takes a stand. Thanks for coming, you three. I appreciate your input.
Give me 1 second. Make sure I got